jungle breathes around you. It's a living, suffocating thing. And every snapping twig sounds like the enemy. Your knuckles are white around the stock of your Springfield rifle. But it's not the rifle you're worried about. It's the long, thin blade fixed to its end. You've heard the stories from other platoons, bayonets that get stuck, that break at the worst possible moment. A fatal flaw. But then you look over at Janssen. His rifle has something different on the end. Something they all laughed at back at camp. It looks like a butcher's knife. It's crude, unauthorized, and tonight it just might be the only thing that works. This was the grim reality for the United States Marines in the Pacific Theater in 1942. They were the tip of the American spear. Yet in the most primal moments of combat, they were armed with a ghost from a previous war. The standard issue bayonet was a design from the era of trench warfare, a long, elegant stiletto of a blade meant for a different kind of fight. It was a weapon designed for the charge across no man's land, not for the tangled, claustrophobic hell of a jungle island. In the vicious, close-quarters fighting that defined the struggle for Guadalcanal, this relic of World War I revealed its deadly weakness. Its narrow blade, while sharp, lacked the structural integrity and width to consistently perform. It could penetrate, but when it struck bone, it could jam, trapping the rifle and leaving a Marine defenseless in the critical seconds that determined life or death. Worse, it could snap. And the psychological impact was devastating. To know that your final line of defense, the cold steel you relied on when ammunition ran dry, was fundamentally flawed, was a seed of doubt no soldier needed. But in the ranks of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, one man had refused to accept this flaw. His name was Vernon Janssen. He wasn't an engineer or an officer. He was a Marine who carried a different kind of knowledge, wisdom passed down not from a military manual, but from family and the hard-earned experience of working the land. Janssen remembered the stories his uncle, a veteran of the Great War, had told him. Stories of the trenches, of the fumbling horror of a bayonet that wouldn't come free. He coupled this inherited wisdom with his own practical skills, honed not on a battlefield, but on a farm. He knew butchering. He understood how a blade's geometry dictated its effectiveness, how a wider, heavier knife moved through flesh and bone with an efficiency a thin blade could never match. This was not abstract theory. It was a physical truth he had felt in his own hands. So, back in the relative safety of Camp Elliott in San Diego before shipping out, Janssen took matters into his own hands. In August of 1942, he made a decision that was both a breach of regulations and an act of profound foresight. He went out and purchased a 10-inch German kitchen knife. It wasn't just any knife. He chose a Solingen blade, famous for its high-quality carbon steel, a butcher's tool designed for relentless, heavy work. He then found someone with a welding torch and crudely, but effectively, fused the wide, formidable blade to the bayonet lug of his Springfield rifle. The reaction from his fellow Marines was exactly what one would expect. He was mocked. His weapon was a freak, an ugly, makeshift thing in a world of standardized, polished equipment. It was the kitchen knife bayonet, a joke to men who placed their faith in the gear they were issued. But Janssen endured the ridicule, his confidence rooted in a deeper understanding of the brutal physics of combat. Now, in the steaming jungles of Guadalcanal, the laughter had long since died. The theories and jokes of stateside training were about to be put to the ultimate test, where the only thing that mattered was what worked. November the 1942. The battle for Guadalcanal had devolved into a series of vicious, intimate struggles in the suffocating darkness under the jungle canopy. Around Henderson Field and along the muddy banks of the Matanikau River, combat was not a matter of long-range rifle fire, but of desperate, chaotic clashes in the dark. This was war at its most elemental level, fought with grenades, knives, and the fixed bayonet. It was here, in these frenzied moments, that Vernon Janssen's ugly, homemade weapon would be christened in battle. The first time he used it, the difference was immediate and shocking. While his comrades fought not only the enemy but their own equipment, struggling with blades that became lodged or, worse, shattered upon impact, Janssen's modified Springfield moved with a terrifying efficiency. The wide, heavy butcher's knife did not perform like a stiletto, it performed like a cleaver. Its weight and geometry, designed for separating bone and sinew, allowed it to enter and exit with a clean, decisive action. There was no struggle, no fatal pause. The high-carbon German steel held its edge and its integrity, refusing to chip or break. It did not bind, it did not stick. It came free with a terrifying and immediate ease, ready for the next threat. Word of this spread through the battalion like wildfire. But it was not a story told in briefing rooms. It was a legend whispered in foxholes, passed between exhausted men cleaning their rifles. They saw the results firsthand. They saw Janssen survive encounters that had claimed others. They witnessed the grim tally grow, one encounter, then another, and another. In the brutal calculus of close-quarters fighting, Janssen's personal kill count, with his improvised bayonet, was estimated to be around 30. The number itself was staggering, a testament to the weapon's effectiveness and Janssen's ferocity. But more important was the underlying data point it represented. While other Marines were dying because their standard-issue blades were failing them, one Marine was not only surviving but dominating these encounters, all because of a 10-inch kitchen knife. The contrast was impossible to ignore. A man would lunge, his bayonet striking home, only to find his rifle hopelessly snagged, turning his weapon into a useless tether to his enemy. In the next moment, he would be dead. Another Marine would parry a blow and his blade would snap, the sharp crack of failing steel echoing as his last sound. Amidst this carnage, Janssen's weapon was a symbol of brutal reliability. The mockery that had followed him from San Diego had completely evaporated, replaced by a desperate and profound respect. The kitchen knife was no longer a joke. It was the answer. It was a tool perfectly suited to the savage environment in which they found themselves. A piece of equipment born not from a committee in a distant capital, but from the grim, practical wisdom of the battlefield itself. For the men of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines, it was the first glimmer of a solution to a problem that was costing them their lives. The success of Janssen's weapon was not a secret kept in a vacuum. It was a tangible, life-saving reality that rippled through the ranks of his unit. Respect quickly turned into imitation. What began as one man's solution became a grassroots movement, a contagion of common sense spreading from one foxhole to the next. Marines, desperate for any edge in the brutal jungle fighting, began to create their own versions of the kitchen knife bayonet. This was not a standardized process. It was a testament to battlefield ingenuity, an ad hoc and clandestine weapons development program run by enlisted men. They scrounged, bartered, and liberated any suitable blade they could find. Some acquired hefty knives from supply depots or ship galleys. Others used captured Japanese blades, turning the enemy's steel against them. Every find was a small victory, a piece of high-quality steel that could be repurposed for the deadly work ahead. The motor pool became a secret workshop. Under the cover of darkness, men with welding skills became the most sought-after soldiers in the battalion. They worked with makeshift equipment, laying down crude, ugly, but brutally strong welds, mating powerful blades to the lugs of Springfield and Garand rifles. Each weapon was unique, a reflection of the materials available and the preferences of its owner. The 2nd Battalion was slowly transforming. Its rifle racks no longer held a uniform line of identical, flawed bayonets. Instead, they displayed a patchwork arsenal of customized weapons. Some blades were longer, some heavier, some with serrated edges. Without any formal direction, these Marines were conducting the most effective field trial imaginable. They were testing different blade geometries, different weights, and different types of steel in the most demanding laboratory on Earth, the battlefields of Guadalcanal. This was innovation at its purest, stripped of all bureaucracy and driven by the most powerful motivator of all, survival. A Marine who had seen his friend die because a standard-issue bayonet snapped was not concerned with regulations. He was concerned with finding a tool that would not fail him in the same way. The collective knowledge grew with each skirmish. Men would compare notes after firefight. A blade that was too long might be unwieldy in the dense undergrowth. A blade that was too light might lack the momentum to be effective. This informal, iterative process of design and testing was producing real-world data at a phenomenal rate. They were discovering, through trial and bloody error, the fundamental principles of what made a superior fighting knife. But this widespread, unauthorized modification of service weapons could not go unnoticed forever. It was both a brilliant solution and a serious breach of military discipline, an entire unit taking rearmament into its own hands. Sooner or later, the command structure would have to take notice. The only question was whether they would see it as a crime to be punished or as a lesson to be learned. Inevitably, the day of reckoning arrived. The man who discovered this clandestine rearmament program was Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell, a supply officer. For the Marines of the 2nd Battalion, this was a moment of profound apprehension. A supply officer, by his very nature, deals in regulations, in inventory lists, and in the strict, unyielding logic of a standardized military. Maxwell could have easily viewed this situation through the narrow lens of military law. These men had modified their issued weapons, a court-martial offense. He could have ordered the confiscation of every non-regulation bayonet, punishing the welders and the men who carried them. It would have been the easy choice, the bureaucratic choice. But Maxwell was not a typical bureaucrat. He was an officer who understood that the ultimate goal of the supply chain was not to enforce regulations, but to ensure the men on the front line had the best possible tools to win and to survive. Instead of initiating disciplinary action, he began an investigation. He walked the lines, not as an enforcer, but as a student of this battlefield phenomenon. He spoke to the Marines. He listened to their stories, not with a prosecutor's ear, but with an engineer's curiosity. He didn't just look at the crude welded weapons. He looked past them to the deadly failures of the equipment they were replacing. He heard first-hand accounts of the M9917 bayonet getting stuck, of the blades shattering at the moment of truth. These were not excuses. They were data points in a catastrophic equipment failure. He interviewed Vernon Janssen, the originator of the entire movement. He examined the now legendary kitchen knife and learned the principles behind its design, the wider blade, the superior steel, the lessons learned from butchering and from a previous war. Maxwell meticulously gathered the evidence. He compiled statistics, not of regulations broken, but of lives saved. He contrasted the performance of the standard issue bayonets with the improvised ones. The results were stark and undeniable. He discovered a significantly higher survival rate among the Marines who had adopted the modified blades. This was not a matter of opinion or anecdotal evidence anymore. It was a quantifiable truth. The Marines with the homemade weapons were living, and the Marines sticking to the official issue were, in too many cases, dying. The situation presented a clear choice: punish the men for their ingenuity or embrace it as a vital combat lesson. Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell chose the latter. He understood that what he was witnessing was not an act of indiscipline, but a desperate and brilliant solution to a fatal problem that the official channels had failed to address. He saw the truth that had been forged in the jungle. The men in the mud knew more about what they needed than the committees in Quantico. So, on December 7th, 1942, 1 year to the day after the attack on Pearl Harbor, he sat down and wrote. He filed a formal, official report, not to condemn the men, but to champion their innovation. Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell's report was an explosive document. It landed on desks thousands of miles away in the polished, orderly world of Quantico, Virginia, the headquarters of the Marine Corps Equipment Board. Here, war was a thing of reports, of test ranges, and of carefully controlled procurement processes. The idea of enlisted men welding kitchen knives to their rifles was anathema to this culture. The report could have easily been buried, dismissed as an aberration, a strange tale from the Pacific that was best ignored. But Maxwell's data was too compelling, his conclusions too stark. He had not just reported a problem, he had provided a data-backed solution. The report made it impossible for the bureaucracy to look away. The responsibility for edged weapons development fell to one man in particular, Major Thomas Hobson. Hobson was now faced with a formal recommendation that originated not from a design bureau, but from the blood-soaked mud of Guadalcanal. He had to take it seriously. The Marine Corps Equipment Board, spurred by Maxwell's report, initiated a formal evaluation. This was the critical transition point, where a grassroots innovation was either crushed by the system or absorbed by it. The board began a series of rigorous, controlled tests. They took the core concepts reported from the field, the wider blade geometry, the superior quality steel, and set out to scientifically validate them. They procured a range of knives, including butcher knives, similar to the one Janssen had used. They tested them against the standard issue M2117 bayonet in a variety of scenarios designed to simulate the stresses of close-quarters combat. The results of these official tests were a stunning vindication of what the Marines on Guadalcanal had already discovered through brutal experience. The wider, heavier blades consistently outperformed the standard issue stiletto. They demonstrated superior penetration without getting lodged in bone. They could withstand impacts that caused the narrower blades to fracture. The higher quality carbon steel of the commercial knives proved far more durable and held a better edge. The tests confirmed, in the sterile environment of a test range, what Maxwell's report had claimed. The improvised weapons were unequivocally superior. The evidence was now overwhelming. The field data from Guadalcanal, combined with the scientific validation from Quantico, painted a damning picture of the standard issue equipment. The system had failed, and the men on the front lines had paid the price. But now, thanks to the courage of men like Janssen and the integrity of officers like Maxwell, the system had a chance to correct itself. The Marine Corps Equipment Board was faced with an undeniable truth. Their official bayonet was a liability, and a better design was not only possible, but had already been unofficially prototyped and proven effective in the most demanding conditions imaginable. The stage was set for one of the fastest equipment redesigns in Marine Corps history, a change driven not from the top down, but from the bottom up. The official confirmation from the test ranges triggered a wave of urgent activity. With American forces pushing deeper into the Pacific, the need for a reliable bayonet was a matter of life and death. The Marine Corps Equipment Board, under Major Hobson's direction, moved with a speed rarely seen in military procurement. On April 15, 1943, the development of a brand new bayonet was officially approved. The design process was not a matter of reinventing the wheel. It was a process of formalizing the lessons learned in combat. The engineers and designers in Quantico now worked to translate the crude, effective principles of Janssen's kitchen knife into a standardized, mass-producible weapon. They focused on the two key elements that had been proven superior: blade geometry and material science. The new design abandoned the long, needle-like profile of the World War I-era bayonet. In its place was a shorter, wider, and thicker blade. It featured a clip-point design, a versatile shape that was excellent for both thrusting and slashing, giving it a utility far beyond that of its predecessor. This was a direct echo of the butcher knife's all-purpose functionality. It was a tool designed not just for the final charge, but for the chaotic, unpredictable nature of a jungle firefight. The choice of steel was equally critical. The board specified a high-carbon steel, mirroring the quality of the German Solingen blade that Janssen had chosen. This ensured the new bayonet would have the toughness to resist chipping and breaking upon impact with bone or enemy equipment, and the hardness to hold a razor-sharp edge through sustained use. The result of this rapid development process was the M1 bayonet. It was a formidable-looking weapon, shorter than its predecessor, but visibly more robust. It was a tool of brutal efficiency, its design language speaking not of parade grounds and tradition, but of the grim realities of the Matanikau River. The speed of its adoption was remarkable. Just 4 months after official approval, in August of 1943, the first production run of the new M1 bayonet was delivered to Marines in the field. A process that could have taken years was compressed into mere months, a direct result of the undeniable proof that had traveled from the front lines. For the Marines who received it, the new bayonet was more than just a piece of equipment. It was a symbol. It was a sign that their experiences mattered, that their sacrifices and their hard-won knowledge were being listened to. To hold the M1 was to hold a weapon born of their own ingenuity, a tool that had been designed and validated by their comrades in the harshest crucible on Earth. It restored confidence in a fundamental piece of their kit, removing a dangerous variable from the terrifying equation of close-quarters combat. The legacy of Vernon Janssen's makeshift weapon was now officially stamped into steel, ready to be issued to every Marine heading into harm's way. The influence of Janssen's innovation did not stop with the adoption of the M1 bayonet. The wave of practical, field-driven design philosophy it unleashed had a much broader impact, fundamentally reshaping the Marine Corps' entire approach to edged weapons. The events on Guadalcanal had highlighted a critical gap in the standard infantryman's kit. A bayonet was a weapon of last resort, fixed to a rifle. But what about a general-purpose tool? A knife that could be used for cutting tangled vines, opening ration cans, prying open ammo crates, and when necessary, could also serve as a deadly fighting knife in its own right. The old bayonet was too long and specialized for these tasks. The Marines needed something more versatile. The same principles that made the kitchen knife bayonet so effective, a robust, wide blade, high-quality steel, and a practical, utilitarian shape, were directly applicable to the development of a new kind of multi-purpose fighting knife. This need gave birth to one of the most iconic blades in military history, the Mark II fighting knife, more famously known as the K-bar. While its development involved several manufacturers and design inputs, its conceptual DNA can be traced directly back to the lessons learned on Guadalcanal. The K-bar was not a delicate, specialized weapon. It was a workhorse. Its 7-inch clip-point blade was made of high-carbon steel, thick enough for prying and strong enough for combat. Its handle, made of stacked leather washers, provided a secure grip in wet, muddy conditions. It was the perfect fusion of a tool and a weapon. It embodied the same spirit of rugged practicality as Janssen's original creation. It was a knife designed by the realities of the Pacific War, not by the traditions of a bygone era. The K-bar became synonymous with the U.S. Marine Corps. It was issued to hundreds of thousands of troops and proved its worth on every island from Tarawa to Iwo Jima. It was a symbol of the self-reliance and adaptability of the Marine ethos. And at its core were the very ideas that had been tested and proven by the 2nd Battalion on Guadalcanal. The wider blade for strength, the high-quality steel for durability, the versatile shape for a multitude of tasks. The story of Vernon Janssen's bayonet is therefore not just about a single weapon. It's about a fundamental shift in thinking. It proved that sometimes the most brilliant solutions come from the lowest ranks. It demonstrated that battlefield experience could and should override rigid adherence to tradition and regulation. The legacy of that single, crude, welded kitchen knife extended far beyond the bayonet lug of one Springfield rifle. It armed an entire generation of Marines with a superior fighting knife and established a design philosophy that continues to influence modern military blade design to this day. It was a powerful reminder that in the chaos of war, the most effective weapon is often the one that is simply and brutally better. Vernon Janssen, the man at the center of this incredible story, was not a general or a strategist. He was a Marine who saw a problem and engineered a solution with the tools he had at hand. His story represents a powerful, recurring theme in military history: the triumph of individual initiative over institutional inertia. In any large organization, especially a military, there is a natural resistance to change. Equipment is standardized for a reason. It simplifies logistics, training, and maintenance. Unsanctioned modifications are seen as a threat to this order, a crack in the foundations of discipline. Yet it is often in these cracks that innovation blooms, watered by the harsh realities of combat. Janssen's story is a prime example of this dynamic. The official system had provided him with a flawed tool. His choice was simple: accept the flaw and risk death, or break the rules and increase his chances of survival. He chose survival, and in doing so, he saved not only his own life, but countless others who would later benefit from his foresight. This was not an act of rebellion for its own sake. It was a deeply pragmatic decision, rooted in a clear-eyed understanding of his environment and his equipment. He possessed what military theorists call situational awareness, but he applied it not just to the enemy's position, but to the very steel in his hands. His actions and those of the men who followed his lead were a form of feedback, a raw, unfiltered report from the front lines telling the command structure that their equipment was failing. The true genius of the system, in this case, was not in its initial design, but in its ability to eventually listen. Lieutenant Colonel Maxwell's role in this cannot be overstated. He was the crucial bridge between the unofficial innovation of the battlefield and the official bureaucracy of the procurement board. Where another officer might have seen insubordination, he saw a vital lesson. He had the wisdom to recognize the value in the Marines' illicit experiments and the courage to report it up the chain of command, risking his own career by endorsing a breach of regulations. His actions ensured that Janssen's brilliant solution did not die in the jungles of Guadalcanal, but instead became a catalyst for institutional change. This narrative serves as a powerful case study in the evolution of military technology. It demonstrates that significant advancements do not always come from scientists in laboratories or engineers in design bureaus. Sometimes they come from a user in the field who is intimately familiar with the shortcomings of their tools and is creative enough to devise a better way. The kitchen knife bayonet was a perfect, if crude, prototype. It was tested, refined, and validated in the most extreme conditions possible, providing the Marine Corps with a fully vetted design concept, free of charge. It was a lesson paid for in mud and blood, but a lesson that ultimately made the entire Corps more lethal and more survivable. In the grand tapestry of the Second World War, a conflict defined by titanic clashes of armies, fleets, and air forces, the story of a single, modified bayonet can seem small, but it is in these small stories that we find the essential truths of warfare. It is a tale of how human ingenuity, forged in the crucible of necessity, can outpace and outperform even the most powerful military-industrial complex. The journey of this idea, from a memory of a World War I veteran to a butcher's knife in a San Diego store, to the bloody proving grounds of Guadalcanal, and finally to the production lines back in the United States, is a microcosm of wartime adaptation. It reminds us that victory is not just a matter of numbers or industrial might. It is won in the final, terrifying moments of close combat, where the quality of a single piece of steel can be the difference between a life saved and a life lost. The legacy of Vernon Janssen's kitchen knife is not just the M1 bayonet or the iconic K-bar. Its true legacy is the principle it represents, that the voice of the soldier on the front line is the most critical one in the process of developing the tools of war. It is a stark reminder that tradition, regulation, and bureaucracy must always be secondary to the grim, practical reality of what works in a firefight. The crude, ugly weld that joined a German kitchen knife to an American rifle was more than just a field modification. It was a bridge between a flawed past and a more effective future. It was a symbol of the individual soldier's ability to observe, to adapt, and to overcome, not just the enemy in front of him, but the institutional failures behind him. It stands as a timeless testament to the fact that sometimes the most profound strategic changes don't begin in a general's tent, but with one Marine who knew a better way to sharpen a blade.